Monoculture will always lead to an increase of disease and insect incidence. It has to, due to the buildup. And my own feeling was not only so much led by the disease or pest problem, but also by the aesthetic appearance of the town, of the city. The more we mix, the more comfortable the area becomes, the more livable it becomes, the more natural.
We entered upon a tree planting program early on in our thinking by creating an incentive for local people to contribute to the planting of a tree in their own name. This way we didn't have to rely on tax dollars to support the tree planting effort. It was quite successful. We started out with 42 trees as a goal, and in a few weeks' time got support for planting over 55 trees in our first planting season.
The public has been very much interested in what we're doing, and this really shows by the number of contributions we are getting. The number of people contributing each year has increased, and we do get contributions as small as $1 and as large as $1,000.
Why should a community get involved in an urban forest management program? The trees and the green space in a community have a tremendously positive contribution to make in terms of the aesthetics, in terms of environmental aspects, and even in terms of economic values, since they increase property values.
Planting a tree next to a street is only one part of an urban forestry program. Community involvement, funding, selection of species, and plans for continuing maintenance are all necessary. There is no one formula that communities can follow, but there are common characteristics in successful community street tree efforts. Among these are seeing the need for a strong program, involving dedicated people from the community, and recognizing that professional help is necessary to get the greatest value from available resources. Professional advice is vital to help communities deal with the stresses man and nature place on the urban environment. One of nature's hungriest pests, the gypsy moth, causes severe damage, often defoliating whole stands of trees. However, the results of Dutch elm disease have been devastating. The almost total loss of our American elm tree has robbed communities of a species that grows rapidly, has high branches, and forms a natural crown over streets and sidewalks like a huge canopy. Washington, D.C. is one of the few areas left where elms still flourish, but their beauty is only a memory in many of our cities and towns. To many local citizens and their elected officials, the answer has been to plant. Plant more trees, fill up the empty spaces, create a nicer environment. Starting and maintaining a street tree program is not a simple task with simple answers. But it has been done by many local communities who have used different paths toward the same goal.
We have 3 specialists in urban forestry who work in New York City and Long Island and the lower Hudson. And these foresters, or these urban foresters, work with community groups. It might be the Garden Club, or it might be the city's Shade Tree Commission, or any community representative on the development of shade tree or street tree or urban forest programs, anywhere from a community as small as a village or as large as New York City. We've worked with several other groups cooperatively in developing and presenting urban forestry programs. For instance, we've worked with cooperative extension agents to put on workshops and seminars. We've worked with the City Parks Department to put on training for parks employees. We've worked with the State Department of Parks and Recreation to put on workshop for their employees. And we're available to work with private arborists as well.
In November of 1972, Mr. Hollis was mayor of Cooperstown, and he was very much interested in the trees of the area and was concerned with the possibility of the number of trees dying and our village becoming treeless. Mr. Hollis thought that the tree committee would be of benefit if it had a member from the garden club represented because of their interest in horticulture. Therefore, I was asked to become a member of his committee, along with Mr. Bateman, who is our horticulturist, and then Mr. Hollis, who represents the village. We try to spend, I would say, about 50% of the funds on new trees and 50% of the funds on pruning. Every March, we send out a letter of appeal, not only to the local residents, but to the summer residents also. And it is mainly through private funds that we are able to continue this work, as well as with a very nice grant from the Clark Foundation each year.
Here's an example of the kind of trees that we plant. These were planted last spring along Main Street in the courthouse area of Cooperstown. These are small maples. They're probably 4, 5, or 6 years old. We do have some vandalism problems with the trees. We lose a couple each year to vandals, and once in a while one will go bad too for various reasons. Planting trees along a highway in a small tree lawn like the area between a sidewalk and a roadway is not the best environment for trees to start with. And the fact that 98% of them survive is sort of gives credence to our first thoughts to buy the more mature trees too. That's another plus, you see.
When we first started our project, we gathered together 4 or 5 individuals who comprised our tree planting committee. These were local businessmen, a farmer, and other residents. We didn't know quite where to start in the beginning. We floundered a bit. We looked for assistance from the county forester and the UVM extension service. For example, our first effort was to plant trees in the sidewalks. What trees grow well in sidewalks? What trees don't? We had certain areas where we wanted to plant underneath utility lines. We certainly didn't want a high-growing canopied tree in those areas, and yet there was a need for greenery. With considerable discussion with these people who gave us free advice, we finally came up with a plan this first year to plant 42 trees in the community. After some solicitation and explaining the program to various service clubs, the schools, and so forth, we got some tremendous response from local individuals. In that first year, we planted over 55 trees. And in appealing to people's egos, in a sense, we did have success without having to go to the taxpayers themselves. As people see the need and see the effectiveness of tree planting and tree maintenance, and how it increases the beauty of the community, and how the scale of buildings is lowered, and how it makes an attractiveness to people, why they come to accept it. And we feel very good about our program.
Most of the maintenance in Durham, I would say, runs about 50% of the overall budget, probably 50% to planting. However, we do feel at this point that we need much more maintenance within the town and some more tax dollars to do what's needed. Any new commercial or industrial development that comes into Durham, of course, has to have a site review by the planning board. From this point, the review as such comes to myself and the Public Works Department, and we make recommendations as to landscaping of the area. Rather than just putting in an expanse of asphalt in Durham, we try to use some brick walkways and some trees planted within these walkways, as opposed to just some kind of curb stop for parking the cars. The way it's dealt with money-wise is the developer is required to post a bond for X amount of dollars, and the town then does the work with this money. Residential areas, we have a little different program in that we will work with the resident to the extent of he will pay the price of the tree, the town will come in and do the planting and pick up the maintenance thereafter of the tree.
The ginkgo trees that you see in the background have been planted in accordance with the master plan developed by the City of Allentown Shade Tree Commission. Here in Allentown, Pennsylvania, we have a system of 3 volunteers serving on what is known as our local Shade Tree Commission. One representative comes from the business community, one represents the local conservation groups, such as the Allentown Garden Club, and the last individual represents the community at large. Basically, the commission serves as an advisory body to the Allentown Parks Bureau. I'm superintendent of parks for the city of Allentown. They review various master plans that have been prepared for subdivisions. They also develop the master plan for planting shade trees within the city of Allentown. They are an advisory commission who reports directly to the mayor, and they function to serve as a means of getting input from the community into the various government plans that affect shade tree plantings. One of the things that perhaps is unique here in Allentown is the fact that once a street tree has been planted, the maintenance becomes the responsibility of the property owner. We have a permit system whereby a property owner who is interested in pruning, spraying, or doing any type of work to the shade tree would apply to the Allentown Parks Bureau. We then review the request for the work and pass judgment on it, either approving or disapproving the work. If the work is not approved, the individual property owner would have the right to appeal our decision to the Shade Tree Commission. The selection of the actual location for a street tree within the city of Allentown is a very difficult task. You've got to contend with parked automobiles, the location of water and sewer stops, make adjustments for factors such as the architecture of the building, whether you're dealing with residential properties, commercial properties, or schools. Here in Allentown, we actually go out into the field and locate each individual tree pit. As you can see here, we have a properly planted tree. It's been wrapped, staked, and guyed in order to give it a good start in its new home. One of the things that is often questioned in Allentown is the source of funds that we use in order to plant trees. Actually, there are several ways in which tree planting programs can be funded. First of all, you can resort to the use of local tax dollars. Here in Allentown, we also depend heavily on volunteer efforts. Various neighborhood organizations have fundraising programs and then use the monies gained from these programs to purchase trees for their neighborhoods. In this particular neighborhood, all of the tree planting has been funded with federal monies. We're talking here about the use of community development dollars as part of the general upgrading and rehabilitation of this entire neighborhood. In Allentown, there are several ways in which tree planting programs can start. Either the individual neighborhood, through fundraising efforts such as raffles, home tours, can contribute funds and start a tree planting program, which will be augmented by the city of Allentown. In other instances, we come into neighborhoods and begin the tree planting program to try and stimulate private interest. In all cases, property owners are individually contacted to determine whether or not they would be willing to accept the care and responsibility of the shade tree. There are no municipal funds expended on the maintenance of street trees in Allentown, and therefore it's important that we have concurrence from the property owner, since the future care of that tree is their responsibility.
Well, the urban forestry program in Rhode Island started a little bit before the federal program. We started by assessing what some of the needs of the communities were, as far as street trees, as far as community woodlands, as far as landfill regeneration. And then the federal government came in about 7 or 8 months after we had gotten started with our initial surveys of looking at the state, and appropriated, or we had money appropriated to us on a 50-50 matching basis. But we initially decided to use that 50-50 funds, whereby the state would fund for an urban forester, myself, and I would then go to various communities and tell them about what services we have. We might assist a community in giving them advice on how they can go about doing a tree inventory. We might go in there with some summer help and work with the community in doing a tree inventory. Or another thing, a newer aspect of our program is where we have 50-50 matching grants, where federal money is matched 50%, local money 50%, and a local contractor can then go ahead and do the inventory for the people. We've had very good response. About half of our communities have had projects of one kind or another.
The program was part of a neighborhood revitalization project for several of the villages in the town of Hopkinton, Rhode Island. And it was funded by the Department of Housing and Community Development, the federal department, under the Community Development Program. And what we were trying to do is revitalize the neighborhood and bring back the splendor of the arcaded streets down the main streets of these villages, which had been lost in the '38 hurricane, as well as rehabilitating the houses and upgrading other amenities in the villages. I went to the state urban forester, who I had met at a meeting about 6 months earlier, because I didn't know the kind of trees that would be suitable for planting along the street. And I figured that he would. The Young Adult Conservation Corps was called in by the state urban forester to do the planting. They did 3/4 of the project was accomplished by them. I had originally planned to hire out the planting to the nurseryman from whom I got the trees, but that became so expensive I was casting about for other ways of achieving the planting, including having an arbor day, having homeowners try to plant it, trying the Boy Scouts. But the problem was lack of experience or competence, and you would have a sort of a intermittent planting in terms of success. And so I asked the state urban forester, and he got in contact with the Young Adult Conservation Corps. The residents have to look after these trees once they have been planted and set up by the town and the YACC. The trees were planted on private property. The town has no budget under Public Works to maintain these trees, and because they are on private property, that was part of the deal, that trees were planted on people's lawns, but they would have to maintain them.
Regardless of whether tree maintenance is the responsibility of city work crews or private landowners, Problems occur when street tree branches are allowed to grow around overhead power and phone lines. Utilities have the task of generating and delivering power to their customers and keeping up with ever-increasing demands by consumers. Conflicts arise when trees are planted without regard to eventual interference with power lines.
Well, the Narragansett Electric Company has a paramount interest in the tree planting program. Specifically, our main interest is to ensure reliability of service to the customers. And with a well-planned tree planting program, our concern is alleviated considerably. Not so much at the time of the tree planting, but in years to come. Some of the trees planted in years gone by have spread over our lines. In the event of a storm or a lightning hit or what have you, the branches will fall over the lines and disrupt service. And consequently, we try to prevent this by having an adequate tree trimming program.
Well, the problem with the utilities, of course, that came right from the very beginning when trees began to interfere with the wires. With them, it was a necessity to prune. With us, it was a nuisance and a constant source of irritation with the people in the town. So we had to find a way in between. In the newer plantings, we tried to eliminate all those trees from underneath the wires, which eventually would interfere with the wires. And that also worked out fairly well. Not always, but fairly well in most cases. If you can get away from interference with the wires, well, then you're all set. Then the problem is licked completely. If pruning has to be done, and in many cases it has to be, just to keep the utilities going, well, then you have to just find a middle way. One which satisfies the utilities and another one which satisfies the abutting owner and the municipality.
Cities with effective street tree programs have cooperated with utility companies and have utilized all their available resources to help create a more pleasant environment for their citizens.
For trees, you need a professional. You need a man. I mean, some people, well, also a lady, by the way, who understands tree growth and where trees fit and what trees will do. You can never measure a tree by what it is today. You can only measure what it is when it's halfway or at least perhaps 3/4 along in its lifespan and its growth. And of course, this I think is very, very important in future planting, to know what trees will be 30 or 40 years from now. This is serious business, because planting of trees will influence the community 20, 30, 40 years later. So it's not a matter of planting what you get from the nursery or what somebody else donates. It's a matter of planting what belongs, what can grow within a particular area.